Generative AI and ChatGPT, friend or foe. And joining our speakers today will be Mr. Kevin Chan, Global Partner Solutions Lead at Microsoft Singapore. Mr. Chan has over 24 years of technical sales and partner experience, and he leads overall strategy and execution for Build With, Go to Market, and Sell With Pillars in Singapore for Microsoft's cloud-powered innovations. Now, it's no secret that Microsoft has been an instrumental force in supporting OpenAI's generative AI efforts, so we are very pleased to be able to have Mr. Chan join us today. Um, if you all can take out your phones and scan this QR code, you would actually be brought to a website where you can enter questions for the panelists. So I'll be monitoring that site. Please feel free to ask anything that's on your mind, ask anything that crossed your mind, in the last three segments of what's presented just now. But I know we might need to warm up a little bit, so let me kick off with one of my own questions first. And we'll open with this, right? How do you envision the role of generative AI like ChatGPT in shaping the future of human-computer interaction? And what potential benefits or drawbacks might we expect from there? Anybody can start?
Um, so as you saw my earlier presentation, I am already a user of both Bing Chat and OpenAI ChatGPT, and the last couple of weeks of using it, I think it's going to fundamentally change a lot of our work processes, especially with oncoming announcements, or rather not announcements, right? Launch of such technologies embedded into Microsoft Office, for example, where you can easily use a Word. You can get Word to generate for you your speeches, or convert that speech into PowerPoint slides, right? That's just telling Office what you want. And I think looking at it from a Singapore perspective, one of the biggest benefit and value, I think, is that it will lead, hopefully, to our birth rates increasing again. I hope that we all can go back at 5 o'clock, because this it's going to make you so much more productive. And then you go back and spend more time with your family and solve the biggest national problem we have, right? Increase our birth rate.
I wasn't expecting that, Laurence, but that's a good one. First, to answer the question, I like to probably give a reference to kind of the genesis of OpenAI and the relationship with Microsoft. Many of you don't know this, but Bill Gates, while obviously big in his philanthropy efforts, has actually been very closely involved in the work we do with OpenAI. He got his first personal preview of it even as early as 2018. And if you know Bill and you heard him and what he, probably the bar that he sets in terms of what he considers to be innovative technology, he challenged the OpenAI team to say, okay, this is all great, but he gave them a test. Take your advanced biology exam. I think it was AP biology in the US, which you cannot be successful in the exam by just memorizing the test. You actually have to understand the material, you have to learn the material, you have to demonstrate a level of mastery of the content. He figured that by giving them the test, they'll go away for 2-3 years and then come back. They came back in about 3 or 4 months, right? And it shows the pace of change in terms of the evolution of what their generative AI capabilities can become. Now, and I was just mentioning to John earlier during the break, is that typically when we release technology, what do we typically do? We do private previews, we invite a few companies. In the case of OpenAI, it was different. We launched it to the public. The average consumer got wind of it, used it, tested it, made it fail, and that's probably one of the most immersive experiences you can get. But what does that get you? It gets you ubiquity, right? So we are no longer talking about whether this is good technology or bad technology, whether it can be used. We all know the best technologies can be used for the best of intentions and the worst of intentions, right? So long story short, to get to the meta point here is, if you all remember your TI, since we're in a university environment, you all remember your Texas Instruments calculator, right? And you remember the debate probably a lot of folks in academia had about the use of calculators in that. Well, that's an old conversation. And the whole conversation about jobs isn't about, will AI take over jobs? But you've heard this phrase that it'll take over jobs for people who don't use AI. AI will become ubiquitous. So for us, even as Microsoft and all the great companies we have in the industry who's innovating on generative AI, I think that the ultimate benefit, the beneficiary will be consumers and those in business who can leverage those tools to kind of remove the drudgery, right? The drudgery of manual tools and data. So going back to the whole Bill Gates story again, this is what Bill said after he saw this next version. Once the folks from OpenAI came back and showed him what they could do, is he equated it to, and mind you, there's been a lot of great technology over the last 20 or 30 years, right? He equated it to as revolutionary as the user interface back then, back in the early 80s, right? Which led to obviously Windows and Macintosh, Mac OS and all that. That's the kind of revolutionary technology we're talking about. And that's the kind of life-changing technology that it has. And that's why I'm really excited that companies like Temus and organizations like AI Singapore is really leading the way to make this real for Singapore.
So I was interestingly going to make the point, but I think there's 2 points to this. The first is that we've been trying to interact with computers since we created them in the 1950s or 1940s, and it started with paper tape. And the first big revolution, as you rightly pointed out, and Bill did indeed speak to this, was the graphical user interface. And his comment was it was the biggest thing since then, right? Since that Xerox PARC visit. But I think that the potential is much bigger. I don't know how many of you have heard of the creation of the new job title called prompt engineer. Have you heard that one? Yeah? So I sat for a moment and thought about this, and I thought, well, what's the difference between a prompt engineer and a programmer? And ultimately, I realized there was actually no difference, as ultimately a programmer and a prompt engineer are both sitting there writing a piece of text to get a computer to do something. Right? The only difference was that a prompt engineer was doing it in English and a programmer was doing it in a computer language. But ultimately, both of them were writing a language to try and get a computer to do something. Now, I think one of the fundamental changes, other than the fact that as a user, we're going to be interacting much more in our own language. But what's most important is it means that if anybody can speak a language, they can also program a computer. So it vastly makes the opportunity to change the nature of the interaction with computers fundamentally. And I don't know if you've been following this, but every night on YouTube, you'll see a new baby AGI or Auto GPT being created that ultimately now is programmed in English and ultimately starts to iterate. So very transformative, certainly as bigger as the GUI, I think probably bigger. Alan?
So, at least for me, on a personal note, I find myself using ChatGPT to rewrite my essays. I get pleasant surprises as to how the same idea could be expressed in a different way, and sometimes properly enhanced. I'm less personally ready to flatly directly ask ChatGPT to write an essay from scratch for me. So write an essay about AI, right, for me. Maybe it's just me because I'm not sure the source and origination, right, of the content in there. And I find that I needed to go back and double check, right, and verify. So rewriting is certainly something that's very, very useful for me. It also caused me to start to question what it means to understand a topic. In my line of work, I'm a consultant. We write, and we no, writing is a separate thing. We analyze data. We come up with hypotheses, and we arrive at conclusions and make recommendations. And so when you compare some of the work that we do to what ChatGPT is able to generate, they are oftentimes, at least so far, what I've discovered, they are eerily similar, right? And it leads me to question a little bit, what do consultants really do? So, and suddenly makes me question, right? When we claim that we understand the topic and therefore can explain it and therefore can draw inferences out of it, is there a difference between how the human understanding works versus a generative AI would work? I don't have the answer to this, but it at least makes me question, right, what it means to understand something. And personally, the third piece that I look forward to the day where someone marries ChatGPT with voice recognition, with maybe 3D printing. I'll say computer, make me Earl Grey. No, no. I'm talking about the way I can do the Star Trek kind of things, right?
Thank you everyone for your thoughts. I think there were quite a few themes that came up, and especially on what this heralds for the future, right? The bright spots as well as some of the more the other points of concern. I'm looking at the Q&A that some people have sent in, and also there's some reflection, right? People are wondering what is going to happen to my job. There was an example given, right? Game illustrators, AI has kind of already taken their jobs, even in the last few months that these generative AI systems have come out for art. And then as we know, AI can code, right? So technology professionals are also beginning to feel some fear, right, in that they may be made redundant. So just curious, right? What are your thoughts on how generative AI is going to contribute to job automation, and how can we actually proactively manage, right? The potential socioeconomic impacts that this might bring.
So I think it's a great question. I think the reality is that technology always disrupts industries. So I don't know if you've heard of the term sabotage, or perhaps know of its origins. Interesting enough, I read up on this, and I'll tell you more of that later. But essentially, the story is that the weavers were upset about the fact that machine looms and steam power was replacing their craft. So they would go to the factories and take their wooden clogs, otherwise known in French as sabots, and they would throw their sabots into the machines, and hence the term sabotage was apparently coined. So this is a centuries-old trend of technology disrupting industries. So any powerful technology will disrupt industries, and there are many disruptions, right? So people in my father's generation would have a secretary who would type up memos for them. Nobody types up memos for anybody anymore, right? And nobody really noticed that change. But technology is fundamentally changing it. Now, I think the important thing is for us to build new capabilities and to create new opportunities. So with every closed door comes an open door. And I think it's our responsibilities as a partner in this to discover new opportunities. So clearly, other ones will disappear, new ones will open. And I think the important thing is to focus on the technology and to allow it to enable new opportunities rather than those that are closing.
I think you spelled it out perfectly. I think ultimately with the jobs that do exist today and the tools that people are doing, the professionals are doing, think about how much more enhanced that would make it in terms of leveraging AI tools to make it better. I don't see, obviously there's always the question of very specific task-oriented roles going away. But humanity has a way of evolving. Humanity has a way of adapting and making these tools and leveraging and enhancing it better. I was just taking a Grab ride and having a conversation with the driver about when do you anticipate self-driving cars, right? And if you're a Grab driver, which many people are, right, that's a very real concern, right? But that's where the combination of policy, education, and preparation, and having the clarity in terms of purpose and alignment to the real problems that we're trying to solve for, including declining birth rates, right? Personally, I'm actually very hopeful and optimistic that generative AI will become pervasive in a way that existing jobs will become better and done better. Newly undiscovered roles will immerse itself. And I'm sure English majors here somewhere in the university will rejoice that, hey, their literary skills will be put to good use to put very high quality prompts in to generate it. So ultimately, I would say it's a shift in terms of what people define as their job functions, not a replacement. And that's where the evolution comes in. I do want to call out in terms of the uses, though, right? If you think about where the real power and potential is, one area is cybersecurity, right? If you think about, and I'll quote a statistic here, in Singapore, being low crime as it is, 2 years ago, more than half the crime was cyber related, right? And if you think about in the world of cybersecurity, how do you solve for it? You solve for it with really good insights into the data and into the threats, right? Millions and millions of threat analysis has to happen. It's a perfect job for AI, and a perfect job for generative AI to anticipate and to basically allow a real job, a security analyst, to use natural language to identify where the potential threats are going to be and anticipate that. So there's a lot of real world scenarios that can solve real world problems today that becomes only better because of generative AI.
Yeah, and I think if you are a coder, if you are a very good coder, generative AI Copilot will make you 10x better. If you are a average coder, it will make you 2x better, right? And for the non-coders here, with things like ChatGPT, you make you a coder, right? You are producing things. So like what Kevin and Matt has said, it's going to bring about increased productivity. It's for people who have skills, you are going to enhance your skills. Or rather, let me rephrase that. Your skills, your output, based on your skills plus generative AI will create 10x or 100x performance increase, right? For the job that was mentioned, illustrator, if you are a very good illustrator, I don't think your job will disappear, because it's just learning how to prompt, use whatever tools to then create. Because you have to remember, right, as an illustrator, it is more the imagination than that drawing capability, right? So now you have tools that can take that very mundane drawing, which is actually the slowest part, but now your creativity can go at 10x or 100x faster to create the artwork that your brain is imagining, which your competitor is not able to replicate. So I think if we think of it this way, most creative people, when they use such tools, they should be able to produce much better work at a much faster pace. For the programmers, I don't think your job will be in any danger anytime soon. Programming is a very creative task. This is not something that's very logical. It has to be logical, but yet a lot of creativity is involved in programming.
There's just one thought I was going to add. If the human species is about 200,000 to 300,000 years. Only for about the last 150 years have any been doing anything other than agriculture and hunting, right? So the number one profession for the last 199,000 years plus was agriculture and hunting, right? Now that takes up less than 1% of the world's population in agriculture, right? So, if you take a pessimistic view, we'll say, well, look, technology destroyed, all the agriculture jobs. We don't have to be out all day under the sun, sweating and planting things and pulling things up and weeding. And not many of us are too upset about that, right? I actually grew up in a farm, and I'm quite happy to take on an AI job, right? So I think this technology is super powerful. We've seen across history humans adapt to such changes and come out much better, much smarter, more affluent, more supported, right? Live longer with more fulfilled lives, have safer lives. And ultimately, this technology is a very empowering one. And I'm super confident that at the end of it, if we manage it effectively, we'll have an even more invigorating and amazing result of this technology as others have been.
Alan, anything you want to add?
I think all I've summarized, right? Essentially, my reaction is that change is constant. Yes, some jobs will evolve, right? Not necessarily go away. And it's just a story repeated, right, over and over again in the human history. Now, there is one thing that might be different, is that the speed at which this is happening, right, might be something that's unprecedented. We have never confronted before. And therefore, from a social lens, right, then societal lens, we would need to make sure, right, there is enough of a policy and governance and support structure, right, to help the masses or the population navigate this change.
Right. Thank you. So I think one more track, right, that I'm seeing inside of the Q&A that people have been submitting is, okay, I get it, that change is constant and, jobs will evolve along with this new technology. But, with this new tech coming up, right, mistakes will definitely be made. AI is not 100% accurate. And there are certain ethical concerns that people have begun to bring up, right, surrounding privacy, surrounding surveillance, surrounding restrictions in terms of access of data, for example, in the public sector. Do you have any thoughts on how we can manage these things as, ChatGPT, as generative AI becomes more and more integrated and integral to our daily lives?
As it was kind of stated earlier, when it comes to generative AI and anything that is potentially revolutionary, we talked about people, right? We talked about purpose or potential in terms of the scenarios. But the third one is obviously policy, right? Making sure that the safeguards are in there. And part of the reason why we invested in OpenAI, even from the very earliest of its envisioning, is to make sure that even by the name of it, right, OpenAI, right, bears in the essence that we knew the potential and risks around AI. So what it fundamentally meant was the whole notion of ethics and around the use of AI, the safeguards in terms of the scenarios where it could use both in governmental and non-governmental scenarios that could be potentially serve humanity for both positive and potentially even extreme scenarios. So all those things probably have to be thought about. But the ultimate, I guess, point of hope here is that you have kind of forward-looking organizations like AI Singapore and others out there that are actually thinking about the type of policies to, one, democratize the use of it in the most positive way for citizens. And that's why citizen services and even governmental uses, there's immense scenarios where it could be very beneficiary. But the third thing is for the average consumer itself, right? Yes, there's always concern. The first thing that everyone talked about in the world of academia was plagiarism, right? But just as quickly as people found ways to plagiarize, we have tools to prevent plagiarism, right? So the checks and balances are there, and we will. And I would say I have confidence that those measures of, I would say, guardrails will be built into technologies, but ultimately also backed up by policy itself.
Yeah, if I may, right? So I think that's a really, really good point. And in my mind, artificial intelligence does not necessarily lead to ethical applications, one way or another, right? So it's a little bit like the gun problem that the U.S. constantly grapples with, right? So there's the one line of this is it's not the gun that kills, it's the person that wields the gun that kills, right? So it's no, I'm not. I don't agree to that in the situation of guns, but in this case, I think artificial intelligence does not mean artificial ethics. Ethics is clearly, at least from in my humble opinion, within the realm of humans. We have to drive, right, the framework, the governance, and the policies that ensure ethical outcomes, right, from the use of AI or any other sort of techniques.
Yeah, so two thoughts. The first is the observation that all of this recent technology is actually bound on human civilization, right? So the first point is that GPT-3 and GPT-4 were based on training from large amounts of human text. So this is not artificial, it's actually learned from humans. So it's the first observation. The second observation is that ChatGPT was further taught by humans. The way I've explained it to some, the technical term is RLHF, or reinforcement learning from human feedback, but the term I've often used is parents. Right, so the kid got to read a lot of text and got a lot of ideas, wasn't so good, got some parents to get it straight, and suddenly got a lot better. Right, so very interesting evolution. But look, it is bounded on human ethics, human guidance, and we need to maintain that focus. We're setting the bar, we're setting what's acceptable, and we need to continue to do so. But I think stepping back a bit, there's a sort of element of privacy in your question. And I think we need not to lose sight of the fact that good data management, good data governance is the center of that. So I think, we do now have the PDPA in Singapore, but I think, my experience, both, in the private sector, but also with Temus, is that we have still some way to go. We do have the basis of policy, but I think the practice of data management and data governance is still an evolutionary space, both in the public and private sector. And I think if we're really going to safeguard privacy, we need to continue to invest not just in AI, but specifically in data. And making sure we understand what it is, what good data quality looks like, what good access control looks like, and then continue to grow that capability and sensitivity, especially when we come to the public sector use cases with even more citizen data. So I think it's a vital thing. Quite apart from AI, the data is ultimately what it's trained on, and the control and management of that is super important.
Yeah, and with respect to ChatGPT, right? Unfortunately, a lot of us, when we sign up, you just click accept and you don't really read the terms and conditions and the fine print, right? And it actually tells you, right, whatever you copy and paste into the prompt, it will be used by OpenAI to retrain the model. A lot of people forget the fact, and that's how Samsung got into the problem, and that's why now Italy is, banning ChatGPT because of all this data being leaked. And that's one, right? So it is not that OpenAI is stealing your data. No, it is telling you that whatever you paste, copy and paste, I'm going to use it. Do you agree? Don't agree? You don't use the service. Full stop. There are now extensions or APIs, or through Microsoft, you can actually have your own private instance of GPT that your data will not be used by OpenAI for training. And the other thing that it's important to remember, not so much on ethics and so on, ChatGPT is not a search engine. How many of you think it's a search engine? It is not a search engine, it's a language model. You want to use a search engine, use Bing Chat. That is a search engine integrated with LLM, or in this case, with ChatGPT. A lot of people assume that because you type something into a text box, you get text coming out, it's a search engine. It is not. It's a language model. If you want the latest, greatest information summarized for you, or generate a marketing article that has the latest information, use Bing Chat. That is the proper way to use. So these two subtle points, a lot of people don't get it. And I think when you bring such technologies to your organizations, you have to emphasize that to your employees. And even within AI Singapore, I was talking to one of my engineers yesterday and said, okay, please include all these points and specifically include in the fact that ChatGPT is not a search engine. And then I had one admin staff behind, and then later say, oh, is it? I keep thinking it's a chat. It was a search engine. So I think it's important that you bring in a technology, you know how to use it. You have to be careful of the data privacy and the ethics side of things. And like what Alan was saying, AI is a tool. It has nothing to do with ethics. It is how you implement or build your use case. Is it ethical or not? I can build a technology or solution or product that is ethical or unethical without or with the use of AI.
Can I give one example in that area? During the kind of the earlier engineering phases and with OpenAI, they hooked up the natural language models to an e-commerce engine, and they put in the chat prompt, "Build me a bomb," right? And literally, the OpenAI engine searched around for all the different chemical components and added it to the basket. And this is part of the engineers were doing in anticipation for all the kind of misuses that you could do, so that they could build in the checks and balances and the guardrails to prevent that. So needless to say, the potentiality for misuse is there, but I think once again, in the trust of humanity and the trust for innovation here, the enabling the right guardrails and right policies to prevent these things from happening will be greatly improved.
All right, thank you, everyone. I think we are coming up on time. Maybe I'll just open to the floor to ask one final question if you have anything burning on your minds that I didn't get to address. Going once? Going twice? Okay, well, thank you everyone so much for coming, and thank you to our speakers for giving the presentation and being on the panel today. Really appreciate everyone's time and commitment of this morning to us, right? So with that, we'll close this event.